Welcome back to the Gin's Treasure. Today we're gonna do an awkward shaped stone, how to wrap it. And for this sample, I chose this red tiger's eye. If you'll notice, it actually chipped at the top there. Kind of a triangular shape, but very odd and uneven. All right, with that, let's get into it. So to begin, I selected slightly more than a hand's length of 20 gauge copper wire. And in addition to that, we're gonna use a 24 gauge copper wire that's about an arm's length. And to start, what we're gonna do is kiss the 2 points together for the 24 gauge wire, and then pinch and slide all the way down to the bottom here where we find the middle. And we're gonna take that and you could do the same thing with kissing the points of the 20 gauge wire. Although it's short enough that you don't have to, you just kind of estimate where the middle is. And then from there you hook the 24 gauge loop onto, so now it's both middles are meeting together. And then from here, we're gonna take our pointer finger with one hand and then same hand, thumb, pinch down and hold both wires into place. And then with your other hand, you're gonna begin wrapping the bands, as I call them, around in an outward direction from the middle. And just to begin, usually I do about 10 or so. And if you look close, you can see there are a few gaps in there. It's uneven. Once I get started with the other side, I'll show you what to do to tighten them up so they're all nice and neat together. So here I've switched, so you can see this was the middle and then it's grown outwards in this direction. Now we're gonna pinch down on the bands and then begin wrapping on the other side. And the technique that I find is most useful for the beginning of the wrapping of these bands is to pull with all fingers except for the index finger. The index finger is kind of used as a guide to keep those bands tight and just guide it as it goes along. So from here, I'll stop and then I'll pinch down on the 20 gauge wire with my index fingers and my thumbs on both ends, and then work them towards each other. And you can see how that's kind of closed those gaps and align them so that they're nice and neat. And then from there you can continue. Now this next portion is gonna be a little different for everyone. It's gonna be based on the type of stone that you're using. Well, not type of stone, but rather the shape of the stone. So my goal for here is to get the bands to be aligned at the base slightly wider than the base of the crystal. So you can see I have a little bit more to go on each side. And when it's complete, I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. And the purpose of it is to kind of just create like a floor, kind of like a tightrope floor for the crystal to balance on. All right, so I feel like I've got enough bands on this side. I'm just gonna switch it around one more time and get a few going on the other side as well. It's kind of important to keep it symmetrical. Not super important, but who doesn't like symmetry? It's aesthetically pleasing and it just looks better. All right, so from here you can see how there's a little bit more length on the bands on the wrap than there is on the base of the length of the crystal. And so what I'm gonna do is kind of curve up using the crystal base as like a measurement. So I bend both sides up and then just double check and make sure that the crystal still fits in there, which it It looks good, it looks nice and snug. And then from here, we're gonna do, well first what I'll do is what I call the bull horns or the long horns, which is where I just bend these outwards. And that's really not for the crystal wrap itself, it's just a manner of, if you saw how they were before, they were kind of crossed over and closing. And I need this room in order to continue the wrap. So it's kind of like room space for my hand to work. But before we begin continuing the wrapping of the bands, what I'm gonna do is take this wire, which started on this side, this 24 gauge wire, and I'm gonna bring it to the other 20 gauge wire. And I'll do a little bit of a space gap. As you can see, it's not like exactly aligned right there. It's slightly elevated. And that's in order to compensate for the bulginess of the crystal. So if you have, for example, you can see how this one's pretty wide. The wider it is, the higher, the bigger the space gap you want. Whereas if it were a thin crystal, then you really don't need much of a space gap at all. In fact, I'm wondering right now if I did enough of a space gap to fit this one, because it's a pretty fat crystal. I'm not so worried about it, because if it doesn't fit exactly, then I can just do a little bit more of a space gap on the other side. So here you can see what I want to do is make it so that the wire is right there placed in the middle. And then from there, what I can do is, it's important to not confuse your wires. So this is the top wire that's already been wrapped. This is the one that I'm going to bring over next. And I'm going to bring it over to the other side just like before. And then begin wrapping on the other side. So if you can see at the top here, this is where those bull horns come in handy, because it gives the wire some space to just easily wrap around. All right, it's looking pretty good. And after, let's say 5 or so wraps, I'll begin getting ready to once again cross over. So once again, this one will come from the back side around, pull this wire down and out of the way, and making sure that the wrap is tight. I can even adjust the bull horns, the long horns a little bit, and then pull tighter, and then begin wrapping once again. And like I said, I like to do about 5 or so wraps before I'm ready to begin the next step, which is bringing this lower wire around across the front and doing the same thing, just wrapping it into place. And by now, you should feel that your stone is getting pretty secure in the wrap, like it's not loose. You can shake it a little bit, not too much, hopefully, and it won't fall out. And then from here, I noticed that these bands were a little bit loose, so I just took my fingernail and pinched down to tighten them up. And I'll do the same thing with the other side, just wrap a few more bands. Basically almost all the way to the top. You can see how it's slightly lower than the top. This one's kind of more even, but that's all right. And then from here, we're gonna do one more going across. And you want to make sure that your wrap isn't too tight that it actually closes over the top. You want to keep it, let's see how to explain it. See how this wire is kind of going over the top of it? I want to tend to avoid that if I can, as best I can. And then, so I'll give you a better example with this one coming across. So when I bring it over and across, I don't want it so that it lines up like that. I would prefer that it goes around the crystal. Although for this specific wrap, because of that break at the top where the crystal, the top part, the top tip snapped off, makes it a little difficult. But that's all right. I think with the first two wraps, it should be good enough. The concern would be that if you close the top too tightly, then there's potential for the stone to pop out of the top. But I think that the way that this is wrapped, it looks pretty good. So from here, what I'm gonna do is wrap these two arms or 20 gauge wires. I'll just continue to wrap them to the point where I can fold them over the top of the crystal and they meet right in the middle, just like there. And so now what it will look like from the top angle is you're gonna have wire coming out in all four directions here. And if you look closely, there's even kind of like a little square window. Well, actually, I kind of wrapped too much. Normally there would be like a square right in the middle, but there's not this time, and that's all right, because the next step, the square is not so important. What I'm gonna do is take this wire, which comes out from the bottom, it goes under this wire, and then around and over the top of both of the 20 gauge wires, and then tucked in back underneath both, and then I pull tight. And then I'll flip it around and do the same thing with this one. So you can see how this one was originally attached to this wire here, and it goes underneath this wire and then around over the top of both wires, and then tucked in the gap underneath both wires, and then you pull tight. And so from here, we have a little bit of excess wire, so that's fine. I'll just, I use about 2 digits of my fingers, of my finger as measurement. So about here is where I'll clip off. And I have a little bit of excess wire there. Maybe I can make some earrings or something out of it. And to match that one, I'll clip off this one as well. And then from here, we're gonna, with the flat part of the pliers, pinch down and bend to create this 90-degree turn, 90-degree angle right here. And then with the rounded part of the pliers, we're gonna bend in the opposite direction, creating this loop with the tail. And we're just gonna continue to curl more loops until that tail meets the crystal down at the bottom there. And then from here, we're gonna pull the 24 gauge wires up and then take the other 20 gauge wire around and then wrap it around kind of like the neck of the crystal, all the way until there's not a lot of wire left. And then we'll just take the tip of that wire and then curl like a little spiral and tuck it underneath the wrap. And then this little pokey part we want to make sure is also tucked away. So with the pliers, we'll just carefully tuck that under that neck wrap as best we can. And if it's still poking out a little bit at this point, that's going to be okay, because what we're going to do is take the 24 gauge wires and continue to wrap the same thing around the neck and downwards towards the crystal, covering up any little pokies that are poking out. And we'll just continue to wrap until we run out of wire. And then with the finish, we'll do the same thing. So we'll take the little tip end and curl it and just kind of tuck it underneath where all that wrap is. on, little guy. Get in there. There we go. And then same thing with this one. We'll just continue to wrap until we get to the pokey tip. And then curl the tip and tuck it under. And there we go. Now my cross wires are a little bit loose, and so there's a little bit of wiggle room for the crystal to jump around a little bit. It's not gonna fall out exactly, but I would prefer for it to be nice and tight. So the style finish that I'm gonna use is to just pinch down in the middle here and just twist the wire a little bit, creating this wavy design. And then I'll do the same thing on the other side of the crystal. Just pinch and twist. So you got these cool little ripples or waves, and that also helps keep the crystal tightly in place. That's how you do that.